Tonight's Nocturne Expeditions takes us to Bermuda, an island set quietly in the Atlantic, where the ocean moves constantly, but the land itself remains steady. A place shaped not only by water and wind, but by centuries of arrival, of survival, and of watchfulness. Tonight, we arrive at a coastal fort built in the early years of the 17th century, when this island was not yet settled, not yet secure, and not yet certain of what it would become. The structures here were not built for comfort. They were built to hold a position, to observe the horizon, and to remain, even when everything around them was still uncertain. Each day, the ocean passed without stopping. Ships moved across it, routes formed, and the island became part of something larger, a quiet but important point within a wider Atlantic world. Tonight, you arrive here not as a visitor, but as someone moving within that space, walking the same ground, crossing the same narrow paths, and returning again and again. There is nothing you need to do here, nothing you need to find, only to move slowly and allow the space to reveal itself in its own time. Settle again into stillness, allowing the breath to slow in its own time, not forced, not directed, just gradually lengthening as the body begins to recognize that there is nowhere else it needs to be. The surface beneath you holds you without effort, without adjustment, and the space around you becomes quieter, not because the world has changed, but because your attention has begun to soften. There is nothing to follow, nothing to solve, nothing that requires your attention beyond this moment. Only the quiet repetition of returning. You wake inside the stone, not beside it, not near it, but fully within it, enclosed by walls that were not built for comfort or ease, but for endurance, for position, for a kind of stability that does not depend on those who pass through it. The room does not introduce itself, does not explain its purpose, and does not need to. It exists with a kind of certainty that feels separate from time, as though the days move across it without leaving much of a mark. The walls rise around you, thick and uneven, carrying a coolness that does not belong to the morning air, but to something older, something that has been held in place for centuries, absorbed slowly into the material itself. When you touch the surface, it does not respond. It does not warm immediately. It does not yield. It simply remains as it has been, steady, quiet, and complete in its own form. The air inside carries a faint trace of salt, not sharp, not fresh, but settled, drawn inward over time, layer by layer, carried through openings and held within the stone until it becomes part of the structure itself. It is not something you notice all at once. It is something that reveals itself slowly. The longer you remain, light enters gradually, not flooding the space, but arriving in narrow, deliberate angles, slipping across the surface of the walls, catching small edges, pauses in the stone. irregularities that have formed over time. The light does not transform the room, it reveals it. You remain still for a moment longer than necessary, not because you are tired, but because the space itself seems to resist urgency. It does not accommodate quick movement. It does not respond to intention. It simply continues, holding its shape, its temperature, its quiet presence. And in that stillness, you begin to feel something else. Not weight exactly, not heaviness, but the sense that this structure has been here long enough to contain many moments at once, not layered in a way that can be easily separated, but accumulated, held together, without needing to be organized. These walls were not placed casually. They were not shaped for comfort, or ease, or even permanence in the way we understand it now. They were constructed to hold a position, to define a boundary, to mark a presence in a place that was not yet stable, not yet secure. In the early years of the 17th century, this island existed in a state of uncertainty, not fully settled, not fully understood, and certainly not protected. What brought people here was not intention, not careful planning, but accident. The Sea Venture shipwreck forced an arrival that had not been chosen, and in that moment, survival became the only priority. But survival does not remain isolated for long. It expands, it organizes, it begins to take shape. Settlement followed, and almost immediately, so did the need to defend what had been claimed. The Atlantic at that time was not an open, empty space. It was a network already in motion, watched, contested, and increasingly structured by routes that connected distant places through movement of ships, of goods, of information, and of power. To remain here, on this small island, set within that larger system, meant to be visible, and to be visible meant to be vulnerable. So the structures began, not large at first, not elaborate, but deliberate. Stone drawn from the island itself, placed carefully, shaped by necessity rather than design, forming low defensive points that could observe, could respond, could hold a position long enough to matter. You can feel that intention in the walls around you. Even now, the angles are not random. The lines are not decorative. Everything directs the body in subtle ways, guiding movement, narrowing space, opening it where needed, closing it where necessary. There are no wasted areas, no unnecessary openings, no excess. Everything serves a purpose. You sit up slowly, feeling the firmness of the ground beneath you, unchanged from the night before, unchanged from countless nights before that. Long before you arrived, you place your feet on the stone floor and pause again, noticing how the space holds you, not comfortably, not gently, but completely, without adjustment. You move toward the opening, where the light has begun to widen, expanding across the surface, revealing small variations in the stone, slight changes in color, texture, depth. Each one is subtle, barely noticeable on its own, but together they form a record, not written, not labeled, but present, each one a mark of time. When you step outside, the transition is immediate. The air shifts, warmer now, moving freely, and you cross it again. The moat, it is narrow, but unmistakable, a cut into the earth that separates the interior from the exterior, not symbolically, not for appearance, but for function, a real barrier shaped by the same logic that shaped the walls themselves. You approach it slowly, not out of hesitation, but because the movement has become familiar, almost ritualized. Each morning, the same crossing, the same few steps, the same brief suspension between one space and another, inside, outside, contained, exposed. You step across. The movement is small, almost insignificant in distance, but it marks a transition that you feel each time, whether you acknowledge it or not. The wind meets you more directly here, no longer softened by stone, moving across the surface of the island without resistance, and with it, the sound of the ocean. Always the ocean. It does not wait to be noticed. It does not quiet itself when you turn away. It continues, steady, rhythmic, moving in patterns that do not depend on your presence, do not adjust to your awareness. You pause just beyond the crossing and look back, not in reflection, not with intention, but simply because the structure draws the eye. Its form is low, anchored, almost merging with the landscape until the lines begin to separate, revealing angles, edges, a geometry shaped by need. This was never built in isolation. The island itself became part of something much larger, a wider Atlantic world, defined not by fixed borders, but by movement, constant, ongoing, connecting distant places through routes that carried goods between ports, ships between coasts, and people across vast distances. Some arrived by choice, many did not. The systems that formed here did not move only materials, they moved lives across distances far greater than this island, through networks that connected continents, reshaping not only the places they touched, but the people within them, the stone behind you, the walls, the fortifications, were shaped within that system, constructed through patterns of labor that extended far beyond what can be seen directly, beyond what remains visible on the surface. You turn again and begin to walk, following the same path toward the shoreline, not consciously remembered, but repeated enough that the body follows it easily. The transition away from the stone does not happen all at once. It unfolds gradually, almost without notice, as though the space itself is loosening its hold. Rather than releasing you entirely, the coolness of the interior remains, for a time, carried with you in memory, more than sensation, while the air outside begins to move more freely, brushing lightly against your skin, carrying with it the constant presence of salt and distance. You do not turn immediately. You do not mark the moment as a departure. You simply continue, step by step, allowing the ground beneath you to guide the movement without needing to direct it. At first, nothing feels different. The wind moves in the same quiet, steady way. the sound of the ocean remains continuous, never rising enough to demand attention, never softening enough to disappear. The light continues its slow expansion across the island, revealing surfaces gradually, without interruption. And yet, as you move further, something begins to shift, not abruptly, but with a subtle consistency that becomes more noticeable. The longer you remain within it, the ground begins to change. The irregularity of stone and weathered surface gives way to something more even, more deliberate, as though the land itself has been adjusted to accommodate a different kind of use. The edges become clearer, the transitions between spaces more defined. What once felt shaped by necessity now begins to feel shaped by intention, not the same kind of necessity that produced the fort, but something more measured, more organized, more controlled. You do not stop walking, but your awareness adjusts. There are other structures here, not ancient, not worn in the same way, not carrying the same quiet accumulation of time. These are more recent, though still settled into the landscape enough that they do not feel new. They do not rise from the ground in the way the fort does, as though drawn from the island itself. Instead, they rest upon it, placed with precision, aligned with one another in ways that suggest planning rather than adaptation. Low buildings begin to appear, spaced at regular intervals, their proportions consistent, their surfaces smoother, their edges sharper. There is a uniformity to them that stands in contrast to the irregular geometry of the stone structure you have just left behind. Nothing here feels uncertain. Nothing here feels provisional. Everything has been measured, arranged, positioned with clarity, and still the quiet remains. But it is a different kind of quiet, less open, less expansive, more contained. The wind moves through these spaces differently now, interrupted by walls that redirect its path, softened by the presence of surfaces that were designed to organize movement rather than simply endure it. The sound of the ocean is still there, always there, but slightly removed, filtered by distance and structure, present without being immediate. You pass between the buildings without hesitation. Your movement does not disturb anything. There is no sense of intrusion, but neither is there a sense of belonging. You are simply present, moving through a space that continues, regardless of your presence, just as the fort continues, just as the island continues, just as the ocean continues. Temporary, long after the earliest fortifications were placed, long after the initial uncertainty of settlement had begun to settle into something more stable. Bermuda did not remain a marginal or isolated place. Its position in the Atlantic ensured that it would become something else, something more integrated into the systems that were expanding across the ocean. The same geography that had once made it vulnerable began to make it valuable, not only as a point of defense, but as a point of coordination. Within a growing maritime network, ships passed through these waters, not randomly, but along routes that became increasingly defined, linking continents through patterns of movement that were repeated again and again. Goods moved along these routes, information moved with them, power moved through them, and the island, small as it was, became part of that system, not as a center, but as a node, a place that could support, observe, and maintain the flow. The earlier structures remained. They did not disappear. They did not become irrelevant. They continued to hold their position, their original purpose still embedded in their form. But alongside them, new structures emerged. The systems that shaped these more recent buildings were different, but not entirely separate from what came before, where the early fortifications were shaped by immediate necessity, by the need to respond quickly to vulnerability. These later structures were shaped by planning, by organization, by an understanding of how to maintain a presence over time, rather than simply establish one. The island became part of a broader strategic network, not just watched, but coordinated, not just defended, but integrated. And so the buildings you move between now reflect that shift. They are not reactive, they are not improvised, they are arranged, measured, placed in relation to one another in ways that extend beyond the immediate landscape. You continue walking, slowly, without needing to reach any particular point. The rhythm of your movement remains steady, unforced, the same pattern of step and pause, settling into the ground. With each repetition, the space does not demand attention, but it holds it gently, allowing your awareness to expand and contract without resistance. There are no sharp transitions here, no clear boundaries that separate one period from another. Instead, the layers exist together, overlapping, intersecting, continuing, without needing to resolve themselves. The same island, different systems, the same position, used again and again in different ways for different purposes, but always in relation to the same underlying reality: access to the Atlantic, visibility across open water, the ability to observe and respond to movement that never fully stops. You pass another building, then another, each one similar enough to suggest a pattern, but not identical enough to feel mechanical. Small variations appear in the details, slight differences in surface, in proportion, in placement, but the overall effect remains one of consistency, of order. This is not a space that formed gradually. It was imposed, designed to function, to maintain, to support a system that extends beyond what is visible here. And still, even within this order, the ocean remains, always just beyond, not fully in view, but never absent. Its presence is constant, shaping the air, the light, the sound. Even when it is not directly seen, you pause for a moment, not because you need to, but because the stillness here invites it. The buildings do not shift. The air settles differently. The movement of the wind is softer, more contained, and in that brief pause, your awareness returns again, without effort, to the stone structure. The contrast is immediate, though not sharply defined. The fort holds time. This place organizes it. The distinction is not something you need to think through. It is something you feel. The difference between a space that has absorbed centuries without changing its form and a space that was constructed to manage time, to structure it, to direct it toward specific purposes. And yet, neither replaces the other. They exist together, without conflict, without resolution. You begin to move again, following the same quiet rhythm, passing once more between the buildings, allowing the repetition to settle more deeply. The path is not memorized, but it becomes familiar through movement, through the simple act of walking it again and again. Without needing to mark each step, the light shifts slightly, almost imperceptibly, altering the way the surfaces appear, softening edges, then sharpening them again. Time passes, but not in a way that feels measured. It accumulates, just as it does in the stone, just as it does in the systems that have shaped this place, and gradually, without marking the moment, your awareness begins to turn again, not fully at first, just a slight shift, a change in direction, and somewhere beyond the ordered lines of these buildings, the presence of the fort returns, not as something separate, not as something distant, but as something that continues alongside this space, existing within the same landscape, within the same flow of time, even as the structures themselves reflect different moments. The same island, different empires, the same logic, position, visibility, control. The words do not need to be spoken fully. They do not need to be explained. They remain as a quiet structure beneath everything else, shaping what has been built here again and again in different forms. You continue moving slowly, without needing to arrive anywhere, allowing the spaces to exist as they are, without forcing them into a single meaning, without resolving the differences between them. It is enough to pass through, and as you do, the presence of the stone remains steady, unchanged, while everything else continues to shift quietly around it. The pattern begins without announcement. There is no clear moment when the work starts, no signal, no shift in tone, only the quiet continuation of movement. You walk, not quickly, not with purpose that needs to be defined, just steadily across the ground, following paths that are not marked, but repeated enough that they begin to feel familiar. The surface beneath you is firm in places, softer in others, small changes that do not interrupt your movement, but remain quietly present. You carry very little, nothing that weighs heavily, nothing that demands attention, only what is needed for the kind of work that unfolds slowly. You move forward, then pause, not because you have reached anything, but because the movement itself begins to slow. You look down. The ground does not reveal anything obvious. No clear shapes, no defined edges, only subtle variations. A difference in color, a slight shift in texture, a surface that feels just slightly different from the one beside it. You remain there for a moment, not searching, not expecting, only observing. Then, without marking the moment, you move again. Step, pause, step. The rhythm settles. Without effort, you cross the same stretch of ground more than once, from one direction, then another. The distance is not large, but it repeats. And in that repetition, something begins to take shape, not clearly, not all at once, but gradually. You place a small marker, then another, not to define the space completely, only to suggest it, to hold a position briefly before moving again. The work does not rush. It does not move forward in a straight line. It circles, returns, pauses. You kneel briefly. The ground closer now, more detailed, more textured. You notice the smallest variations, then stand again and continue. There is no urgency here, no expectation that something must be found, only the quiet repetition of looking, of moving, of returning. The wind moves across the space as it always does, not changing, not responding, only continuing. and the sound of the ocean remains just beyond, always present, even when you are not facing it, even when your attention rests elsewhere. You walk again, the same line, then slightly to the side, then back. The pattern is not rigid, but it forms, without needing to be defined. You begin to understand the space, not through discovery, but through repetition, through the act of moving across it, again and again, until it becomes familiar, not in detail, but in feeling. There are moments when nothing changes at all, when the ground appears the same from one step to the next, and still you continue, because the work is not about finding something new. It is about staying long enough to notice what is already there. The light shifts gradually, not enough to alter the space, only enough to change the way it appears. Edges soften, then sharpen again. Colors deepen, then fade. Time passes without needing to be measured. You move again toward a place you have already crossed, not because it calls you back, but because the pattern allows it. Nothing prevents return. Nothing demands progress. The work continues in loops, and within those loops, the space begins to hold. You pause again, looking down, not with expectation, but with familiarity. The surface is no longer unfamiliar. It has been crossed, observed, returned to, and in that repetition, it becomes known, not completely, but enough. The tools you carry remain simple, used lightly, without force, without urgency. You mark a place, then step away from it, return again, then move beyond it. Nothing is fixed, nothing is final. Everything remains open. The wind continues, the ocean continues. The island holds its position, and you move within it. The rhythm deepens. Step, pause, step. The same movement, repeated without strain. Your awareness shifts between ground, air, sound, and back again. Nothing holds for long. Everything passes and returns. You begin to notice that the work itself has no clear boundary. It does not begin sharply. It does not end completely. It simply continues as long as you remain within it. And when you step away, it does not disappear. It remains held within the space, waiting without urgency. The pattern continues. You walk again, crossing ground you have already known, not to repeat it exactly, but to move through it once more. The light softens slightly, the wind shifts, barely, and the ocean continues, just beyond, always just beyond. You slow again, not stopping, only allowing the movement to settle. And in that quiet rhythm, the work continues, without needing to arrive anywhere at all. The movement does not stop, it only softens. The rhythm you have been moving within remains, even as your attention begins to loosen. You are still walking, but not with the same awareness of each step. The ground remains beneath you, steady, unchanged, but you no longer need to follow it. In the same deliberate way, the pattern continues, even as you begin to release it. Step, pause, step, then less defined. The movement no longer needs to be counted. It continues on its own. The space around you does not shift suddenly. It does not close. It does not fade. It remains exactly as it has been. The island holds its position. The air continues to move, lightly, without interruption. The ocean remains just beyond, steady, rhythmic, unchanged by your presence, unchanged by your absence. You are no longer moving toward anything. There is no direction that needs to be followed, no place that needs to be reached. only the continuation of what is already here. The structures remain, the stone, the walls, the fort, holding their place as they have always done. The moat remains, a narrow line cut into the earth, unchanged, waiting, without needing to be crossed. The buildings of the base remain, ordered, measured, quiet, holding their form, without effort. The systems that shaped them continue, not visibly, not actively, but present. The same island, different layers, all held together, without needing to be resolved. The wind moves across them all, without distinction, without preference, touching stone, surface, water, in the same quiet way. The light continues its slow movement, across walls, across ground, across the surface of the water. Nothing resists it, nothing interrupts it. It moves, as it always has. Time does not stop, but it no longer feels like movement. It settles, accumulating quietly within the structures, within the ground, within the space itself. The work remains, not as something unfinished, not as something waiting, but as something that simply continues beyond your attention. You are no longer required within it. The walking slows, then softens further, then becomes something less defined, not stopping, but no longer needing to continue. The awareness of the ground fades slightly, not disappearing, but becoming less necessary. The sound of the ocean remains steady, even, unchanged. It does not call you, it does not guide you, it simply continues. And in that continuity, everything settles. The fort remains, the island remains, the ocean continues, and the movement that carried you through it no longer needs to be followed. There is nothing to return to, nothing to leave behind, only the quiet presence of what continues, whether you are within it or not. The air softens, the light settles, the sound continues, and gradually, without marking the moment, your awareness begins to drift, not away, not toward anything, but simply loosening. The structures remain, the ground remains, the ocean remains, everything holds its place, without effort, without change, and within that stillness, you no longer need to move at all.